I grew up wanting to be a nun, actually a ballerina nun, until my mom told me that nuns weren't allowed to show their legs. That was the first of many times that what I thought was possible directly clashed with the world that I was born into. It was a world with very strict rules and very definite expectations. You weren't meant to be competitive. If you won, somebody else lost. Girls did girl things, and boys did boy things. I almost got expelled in grade school when I gathered all my girlfriends and we beaded necklaces and bracelets. And then at recess, we sold them all, and we were doing a booming business. The nuns weren't really sure what I was doing wrong, but I was doing something wrong. They gathered, had a big meeting, and decided to publicly reprimand me. I was never sure what I had done wrong. 10 years later, not very much had changed. As an NYU graduate, the first question I was asked when I went to interviews was, how many words a minute can you type? I grew up with a picture very similar to this one of my mother on the mantelpiece. It was a long row of women, perfectly coiffed, all in a row in Italy where she had grown up, sitting at their typewriters. And we marveled at her. She would sit at the computer, well, typewriter back then, and type away furiously, and she never even looked at the keyboard. I never mastered that skill. And in fact, I still don't. Every time I take the computer, I feel slightly inadequate when I place my hands on it, and I can't do that. My inadequacies went on to be many. I was a young girl that was naturally left-handed, I was dyslexic, and I was endlessly confronted with gentle head shaking. In the 1970s, I underwent popular psychometric tests. I was shown to be very good at tedious and repetitive tasks. I went in to the examiner. We'd all waited to hear what could we possibly become when we grew up. And I sat down, and I looked across, and I could see that she was desperately hiding the tedious life that I had ahead. She had no kind words to send me forth into my future. Of course, she hadn't thought what a positive that would be to a polar explorer, nor had she even thought to offer that as a possibility of career. It wasn't until I got married, I did as I was told. It was an end unto itself. I had got married, and now I was passed on to a husband, and it was his problem now to worry about me. I got involved with Save the Rhino. It wasn't until one afternoon in Shropshire, I went on some hill walking. I'd gone to visit a very, very good friend of mine who was an experienced mountaineer. I'd always been hugely inspired by what he did. His walls were full of pictures of exotic places. His rooms were full of ropes, and he was like a fairy tale to me. After walking, we had gone back home, and we sat by the fire, and we were reading a few stories. Borgi Ausland, a Norwegian, had just managed to go to the North Pole solo and unaccompanied. I was like, this is amazing. I said, has any woman ever done this? He said, no. And before my mind had the ability to censor my desire, I said, I want to be that woman. And he looked up and said, well, just do it. And that seemed preposterous, even absurd. I had not had the courage yet to recognize my dream and to take the steps to make that dream possible. Years later, I had started to make the steps possible. I got involved with Save the Rhino. At this point, I was divorced. And I had started to become known for taking up a challenge. We had taken this great rhino costume up mountains, across deserts, and then, in 2003, I got that call that I had waited for all my life. How about going to the North Pole? I couldn't believe it. of course. It turned out to be the magnetic pole, but that didn't matter. I was on the way to putting the experience together to match my desire. I ended up winning that race with my teammate. I found that I was very good in the cold and coped remarkably well with tedious and repetitive tasks. I may be good, I may be better on a cold day, hate the heat, but the reality of living my dream is still the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my life. It means dragging a sled that weighs 90 kilos across the Arctic Ocean, 50 degrees below zero, for up to 12 hours a day. Hearing the thunderous crack of the ice breaking up underneath you to reveal a pitch black sea that you have to get into and swim across to the other side. Getting in your sleeping bag, 5 layers, only to wake up to polar bear tracks outside your tent. Climbing, falling a lot every single day over ice rubble that sometimes is as high as 2-story buildings. And so during those days, I often wonder, why am I doing this? And that doubt, I promise you, creeps up all the time. But I immediately go back to that afternoon in Shropshire. And then I just put my head down and know I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. I've had 2 failed attempts at reaching the North Pole. The first time in 2009, after 3 days, I had to be pulled off. The extreme cold, 57 below zero that year, shattered all of my stoves, making it impossible for me to melt the ice and eat. The second time, in 2010, I got caught on this little island. It had separated away from the main part of the ice and was floating back to Canada at the rate of 25 kilometers a day. At a certain point, it became mathematically impossible for me to reach the North Pole in time for it to be safe for any airplane to come and get me. So I had to come off. 2 days later, I found that I was almost 4 months pregnant. At this point, I would have the perfect excuse not to go back next year. All the rules of my world have kicked back in, and I'm considered a slightly unnatural mother for even contemplating attempting the North again with a little infant to take care of. But I'm not saving the world. I'm not curing cancer. I'm only following my dream. And it's what makes me happy, it's what makes me proud, and able to look at him in the eyes. So I know I want to go back. And I want to go back because every time that I hear that next year there's another woman that's going to meet me up there and challenge me for this record, my stomach turns, adrenaline surges, and I get a steely focus that, unlike everything the nuns have taught me, is less like Santa Cristina and more like General Franco. So in the words of that very famous contemporary poet, it's time to just do it. So I hope to leave you today with that permission that was passed to me in that afternoon in Shropshire. Because I don't want you to wait as long as it took me to recognize your dream, believe in it, and just do it. Thank you.